the police came to talk to us and get statements, and because the children were in the house at the time that Keely died, they needed the clothes that the children had on, so they had to take their clothes off of them while they were in bed for forensics. And I think that's one of the hardest things, the realisation that this did happen.
Mm. Until the trial started on the 24th, when we started to understand the full magnitude of the abuse, how long it had been going, and just how much fear and terror Keely had been living in for at least the previous 3 years, and probably longer. We just don't have any evidence of it before 2015. But we had absolutely no idea. We had no. Even building up to the trial, we thought that it was probably an isolated incident, and when the trial started, we understood it absolutely wasn't.
There was a couple of domestic violence incidents where she'd gone to hospital. He'd kicked her in the stomach when she was pregnant with the first child. She reported him and then withdrew it, so nothing was taken any further. A next door neighbour, he owned the row of houses that they lived in, and they lived on the end. The person next door to them witnessed an actual incident where Keely was picked up and flung against the wall.
Because she'd been out for a meal.
For an hour for drinks with this woman.
And one of the babies was crying.
Yeah.
That was her explanation as to why she received a beating. She was out, one of the babies was crying, and she was out, she couldn't deal with it, so he had to deal with it. And as a result, when they came back from their meal, I think, went round to the neighbour's house initially, I think for another drink before she went home, and while she was in the house, he stormed in, didn't walk straight in, because as far as he was concerned, he owned the house, therefore he could, and assaulted Keely in front of this neighbour and her husband. Thankfully, it wasn't. She gave evidence. They actually moved out of the house a couple of weeks after the incident. I don't think that was irrelevant, but they moved out, and nobody else ever moved in. It was about 3 years, I think. It was empty. Keely always said it was because Tony didn't like living next door to anyone. We now know that she could hear what was happening. She'd heard other incidents and gone to see Keely the next day, and Keely said, "Oh, he'd pushed me down the stairs, and he'd raped her."
He'd raped her.
Again, so this came out of the trial.
He didn't want people living next door because they could hear. Whereas, again, we didn't think that either. Other incidents where he had videoed her under duress. She'd gone out last year. She was 30. She'd gone out for a meal with her friend, a different friend, came home, and he'd videoed her on the sofa, lying down, crying, and he's calling her names, saying she was disgusting, she wasn't a fit mother. And then there was a second video where Keely had her hands over her face and was crying, and he was making her say things. And apparently he'd sat up with her all night and with her phone next to her and said to her, "If your phone goes off and it's somebody we don't know who it is, you won't wake up tomorrow morning."
Yeah. She'd just gone out with one friend to a restaurant to celebrate her 30th birthday.
She was home at 10:30.
She was home at 10:30. It wasn't an all-nighter with a big crowd or anything like this. One friend for a meal, back in at 10:30, and it cost her a beating.
She sent a picture to one of her friends of her beaten face, and she'd also called an ambulance because she couldn't breathe and had gone to hospital. We didn't know that either.
You know, these are severe beatings, enough that she had to go to hospital and get medical treatment.
And then we also found out that the weekend before she died, when she was staying with us, that he made about 8 videos, made a video diary of himself at home. I think he was trying to convince people that she was the abuser, that he wasn't allowed out, that Keely went through his phone. He wasn't allowed to go to the pub, he wasn't allowed to do anything. So he made 4 videos on the Friday night and 4 videos on the Saturday night, showing that the house was empty, that there was nobody there. But the way he was doing it was quite chilling, and the last video that was shown was him saying, "This isn't going to end well." And I don't know if he sent those to Keely or whether they were just for him. We don't know, do we?
They were shown in evidence in court. Yeah. But it's one of those things that some people you say and has no real relevance. It's just one of those things you say. But now knowing what he did do, we believe he'd made his plan by then.
It makes it sound like people think that women go through this, or men, that they're doormats. Keely wasn't a doormat. She
thought she was quite strong-willed.
She was. She'd picked herself up and moved herself a few times. She stood up for herself. So this is why it's just so hard to understand how she could get into the situation where she couldn't get out of it.
In his attempt to paint us as bad parents, he'd given evidence that we had told him, Claire specifically, had told him that we'd never allow Keely to come back and live with us again. She was with him now, that she had had a family with him, and as far as we were concerned, she could never come and live home. Now that conversation never happened, but he probably told Keely that. And so when we ask ourselves why she never told us, why didn't she come to us for help, that's one possible explanation. He'd probably told her that Claire had said that we'd never allow her to come home. That was probably part of the manipulation and the managing of the situation. We'd never told him anything like that, and she certainly could have come home had we had any idea that this was going on.
From the minute we picked them up, obviously it would have just been the elder one that would have asked anything. He never said anything. We did end up, after the first couple of days, he started being sick quite a lot. We did end up in hospital with him for 2 days. Couldn't find out what was wrong with him. He went downhill quite rapidly. He wouldn't eat, he wouldn't drink. He looked really poorly. And as soon as he came back here, he perked up and was absolutely fine. But he had said he'd heard the Hulk in our house, and that the Hulk was somebody. I said to him that the Hulk isn't in the house, and he said yes, he's in the house. That would have been 2 days after Keely died, and then he was automatically sick. So he obviously suffered from some sort of trauma.
They were in their own home the night that Keely was murdered. The next night they went to sleep on the sofa in their family friend's house, but woke up in our house. You would have thought there would have been some questions as to how that all happened, but there weren't. And we suspect that even for children so young, they subconsciously were aware that something had happened that meant, which whilst they didn't necessarily understand what had happened, they understood something had happened that meant that they were now at their grandma and pops's house. when people message you or contact you daily or weekly, people who you haven't spoken to for years and years, and then you realise that it has affected them as well. So yes, the 5 children are the most important victims behind Keely, of course. Then perhaps us and Keely's sister, but there are dozens and dozens of people who have been affected by this, and are struggling themselves. It's not just us. There are lots of people. As a parent, and more specifically as a father to a daughter, you feel your one role is to protect your children. I know I couldn't because I didn't know, but then you ask yourself the question, well, why didn't I know? Well, I didn't know because she didn't tell us, but then why did she feel she couldn't tell us? So you run through these series of questions, and you never get an answer. You can't answer them because she's not here to answer. But we felt even worse having heard all this. Not it's bad enough. There was nothing worse than knowing your daughter's been murdered, but knowing that we didn't know, and had we known, could we have done something about it? Could we have helped?
Why did we let her go home?
Yeah, that Sunday, we knew that she wasn't right. We certainly didn't know why. We certainly didn't know the extent of it. But could we have sensed something a bit more? Could we have stopped her going out? These are the sort of questions you ask yourself, and there was no answer.